A 34-year-old Protestant construction worker in rural Tennessee had been in a coma for 17 days after a devastating work accident. Doctors told his family to prepare for the worst. But at 3:47 a.m. on day 18, he suddenly opened his eyes and told the nurses he heard the Virgin Mary whispering his name, calling him back to life. The Tennessee sun was just breaking over the Cumberland Mountains that Tuesday morning in October when Jake Harrison kissed his wife Sarah goodbye and headed out to what would become the most devastating day of his life. At 34, Jake was everything you'd expect from a third-generation construction worker in Cookeville's strong hands, calloused from years of honest labor, a back that ached most mornings, and a faith as solid as the Baptist church his family had attended for over 60 years. "Be careful out there, honey," Sarah called from the kitchen window as Jake climbed into his pickup truck. It was their daily ritual, her worry, his reassurance, the unspoken understanding that construction work carried risks they both preferred not to think about too deeply. "Always am, darlin'," Jake replied with the confident grin that had first caught Sarah's attention 15 years earlier at a church youth group meeting. "See you tonight." Those would be the last words Sarah heard her husband speak with his own voice for 17 days. The Harrison family had deep roots in the red clay of Tennessee soil. Jake's great-grandfather had helped build some of the first churches in Putnam County. His grandfather had worked on the interstate system in the 1960s, and his father had spent 40 years framing houses before his knees finally gave out. Each generation had passed down two things without question: the skills to work with their hands and an unwavering commitment to Baptist faith. "We don't need no fancy ceremonies or saints to talk to Jesus," Jake's father, Bill Harrison, had always said. "We got a direct line to the Almighty, and that's all a man needs." Jake had never questioned this theology, just as he'd never questioned the sunrise or the changing of seasons. Faith was practical in the Harrison household. You worked hard, you treated people right, you went to church on Sunday, and you trusted that God would handle the rest. No complications, no mysteries, no room for what Bill called Catholic superstitions. That morning, Jake was working on a new commercial building project on the outskirts of Cookeville, a 3-story office complex that would house several medical practices. He was part of a crew of 8 men, most of whom he'd worked with for years, operating the tower crane that lifted heavy steel beams into place. Jake had been running tower cranes for over 12 years. He knew every sound the machine made, every vibration that traveled through the steel cab, every safety protocol by heart. Which made what happened at 10:23 a.m. all the more inexplicable. According to the accident report filed later by OSHA investigators, a hydraulic line in the crane's boom assembly had suffered what they termed catastrophic failure, a 1 in a million mechanical breakdown that caused the entire boom to swing violently to the left while Jake was positioning a 2-ton steel beam 40 feet above the construction site. Jake had perhaps 3 seconds to react. Security cameras later showed him trying to jump clear of the cab as the boom twisted and the crane began to topple. But 40 feet is a long way down, and construction sites are filled with unforgiving surfaces: concrete footings, steel rebar, heavy machinery, and stacks of building materials that can turn a survivable fall into something much worse. Jake Harrison hit the ground at 10:24 a.m., his body striking a pile of steel reinforcement bars before bouncing onto the concrete foundation. The sound, witnesses later said, was something they'd never forget, like a gunshot echoing across the job site, followed by the terrible silence that comes when experienced construction workers know someone has been badly hurt. Miguel Sanchez, the site foreman, was the first to reach Jake. Miguel had seen construction accidents before: broken bones, cuts that required stitches, the occasional concussion, but nothing had prepared him for what he found that morning. Jake was unconscious, his breathing shallow and labored. Blood was pooling beneath his head where it had struck the concrete. His left arm was clearly broken, twisted at an angle that made Miguel's stomach turn. But it was the stillness that scared Miguel most, the complete absence of movement that suggested damage far beyond broken bones. "Call 911. Miguel shouted to the other workers. Call them now. The ambulance arrived in 12 minutes, excellent response time for rural Tennessee, but paramedics Tom Bradley and Jennifer Mills knew immediately they were dealing with something serious. Jake's pupils were fixed and dilated, his responses to pain were minimal, and his breathing patterns suggested significant trauma to his brain. "We need to get him to Cookeville Regional fast," Tom told his partner as they worked to stabilize Jake's neck and spine. "This is way beyond what we can handle here." The 15-minute ambulance ride to Cookeville Regional Medical Center was a blur of medical procedures, radio communications with the emergency room, and the controlled urgency that comes with knowing someone's life hangs in the balance. Jake remained unconscious throughout the transport, his vital signs growing weaker with each mile. Dr. Rebecca Martinez was waiting in the emergency room when the ambulance arrived. At 42, Dr. Martinez had 15 years of emergency medicine experience, including a residency in trauma surgery at Vanderbilt Medical Center in Nashville. She'd seen every type of injury imaginable, but head trauma cases always carried a special weight, the knowledge that the next few hours would determine whether someone went home to their family or never spoke again. "What do we have?" Dr. Martinez asked as the paramedics wheeled Jake into Trauma Bay 3. 34-year-old male fell approximately 40 feet from a construction crane, Tom reported. Multiple impact injuries, possible skull fracture, Glasgow coma scale of 4 on scene, deteriorating to 3 during transport. Dr. Martinez knew that numbers told the story more clearly than words. A Glasgow coma scale of 3, the lowest possible score, indicated severe brain injury with minimal hope for meaningful recovery. But she also knew that the first 24 hours after head trauma were critical, and miracles, while rare, weren't impossible. The next 6 hours were a medical marathon. CT scans revealed what Dr. Martinez had feared: severe swelling of Jake's brain, multiple skull fractures, and bleeding that required immediate surgical intervention. Jake was rushed into emergency surgery while hospital staff worked to locate his family and prepare them for news that would change their lives forever. Sarah Harrison was teaching her second-grade class at Cookeville Elementary when the principal, Mrs. Johnson, appeared in her classroom doorway with an expression that instantly told Sarah something terrible had happened. "Sarah, honey, you need to come with me," Mrs. Johnson said quietly. "There's been an accident." The drive to the hospital was the longest 15 minutes of Sarah's life. Mrs. Johnson had explained what little she knew. Jake had been hurt at work, it was serious, he was in surgery. But Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Bill and Margaret Harrison, Jake's parents, arrived at the hospital shortly after Sarah. Bill, now 68 and walking with the careful gait of a man whose body bore the accumulated damage of 4 decades in construction, looked older than Sarah had ever seen him. Margaret, normally the family's source of strength and optimism, clutched her husband's arm with white knuckles. "What do we know?" Bill asked Sarah when they met in the hospital's family waiting area. "He's in surgery," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Head trauma. The doctor said it was serious." For the next 4 hours, the Harrison family did what families do in hospital waiting rooms. They waited, prayed, paced, and tried to make sense of how a normal Tuesday morning had turned into their worst nightmare. Church members began arriving by early afternoon, bringing food no one wanted to eat and offering prayers that felt both essential and inadequate. Pastor Jim Williams from First Baptist Church of Cookeville arrived around 3 p.m. Pastor Jim had married Jake and Sarah, baptized them both as teenagers, and presided over more family crises than he cared to count. He found the Harrison family huddled together in the corner of the waiting room, holding hands in a prayer circle that seemed to be their only anchor in the storm. "Any word?" Pastor Jim asked Bill quietly. "Still in surgery," Bill replied. "Been 5 hours now. That can't be good, can it, Pastor?" Pastor Jim had learned long ago that hospital waiting rooms weren't places for false optimism, but they weren't places for despair either. Surgery takes time when they're being thorough, he said. The Lord's got Jake in his hands, and these doctors know what they're doing. At 6:45 p.m., Dr. Martinez finally emerged from the surgical suite, still wearing scrubs that told the story of a long, difficult operation. The Harrison family gathered around her like survivors clinging to a life raft. The surgery went as well as we could hope, Dr. Martinez began, choosing her words carefully. We were able to relieve the pressure on Jake's brain and stop the internal bleeding. But I need you to understand, he's suffered severe traumatic brain injury. The next 72 hours will be critical. What does that mean exactly? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. It means we wait. Jake's in a medically induced coma to help his brain heal. We'll monitor his brain activity, watch for signs of improvement, and hope his body can begin the recovery process. Will he wake up? Margaret Harrison asked, voicing the question they were all afraid to ask. Dr. Martinez had delivered this news too many times to offer false hope, but she also understood the power of faith in the healing process. Mrs. Harrison, I've seen people recover from injuries that seemed impossible. I've also seen cases where families had to make very difficult decisions. Right now, Jake's young, he's strong, and he was healthy before the accident. Those are all factors in his favor. But I want you to understand the severity of his condition. The message was clear without being cruel. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and understand that the next few days would determine Jake Harrison's future, if he had one. Jake was moved to the intensive care unit, where he would remain for the next 17 days connected to machines that breathed for him, monitored his heart rate, and tracked the electrical activity in his damaged brain. The ICU became a second home for the Harrison family, a sterile world of beeping monitors, hushed conversations, and the constant presence of nurses who moved with the quiet efficiency that comes from working daily with life and death. Sarah barely left Jake's bedside. She took a leave of absence from teaching, surviving on coffee and the sandwiches that church members brought daily. She talked to Jake constantly, reading him scripture, telling him about her day, playing his favorite country music on her phone, anything that might somehow reach through the darkness and remind him that he was loved. The doctors say you might be able to hear me, she whispered to her unconscious husband on day 3. So I need you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You just rest and get better, and when you're ready, you come back to me. Bill Harrison struggled with his son's condition in a different way. A man accustomed to fixing things with his hands, he found the helplessness almost unbearable. He would sit beside Jake's bed, studying the monitors, asking nurses technical questions about brain pressure and medication dosages, searching for some way to understand and control a situation that was completely beyond his influence. I don't understand why God would let this happen, Bill confided to Pastor Jim during one of the minister's daily visits. Jake's a good man. Goes to church, works hard, treats people right. Why would the Lord allow this? Pastor Jim had wrestled with these questions throughout 30 years of ministry. I don't know, Bill. I wish I had better answers. But I know that sometimes God's ways aren't our ways, and sometimes He allows suffering for reasons we can't see. The first week passed with small signs that Jake's body was fighting to heal. His vital signs remained stable, the swelling in his brain began to reduce slightly, and his responses to certain stimuli showed minimal improvement. Dr. Martinez remained cautiously optimistic, but she also prepared the family for the possibility of long-term disability, permanent vegetative state, or worse. The second week brought new challenges. Jake developed pneumonia, a common complication for coma patients who require mechanical ventilation. His fever spiked to dangerous levels, and for 48 hours, the medical team fought to keep his weakened body stable while treating the infection. "We're at a critical juncture," Dr. Martinez explained to the family on day 10. "Jake's body is fighting on multiple fronts: the brain injury, the pneumonia, and the general stress of being unconscious for an extended period. The next few days will tell us a lot about his capacity for recovery." It was during the second week that something unexpected began happening in Jake's room, something that would later become a source of both comfort and controversy within the Harrison family. Maria Santos, a night shift nurse who had emigrated from Mexico 15 years earlier, had been caring for Jake since his arrival in the ICU. Maria was known among her colleagues for her clinical expertise, but also for her deep Catholic faith and her habit of quietly praying for her patients during the long night hours. "I hope you don't mind," Maria said to Sarah on day 12, "but I've been saying prayers for Jake. In my faith, we ask the Virgin Mary to intercede for us, especially in times of great need." Sarah, raised in a tradition that viewed Catholic practices with suspicion, found herself surprisingly comforted by Maria's words. "I don't mind at all," she replied. "Jake needs all the prayers he can get." What Sarah didn't know was that Maria had been doing more than just praying. Each night, during the quiet hours when families went home and the ICU settled into its overnight rhythm, Maria would place a small medal of Our Lady of Sorrows, the patroness of those who suffer, on Jake's bedside table and quietly ask Mary to watch over this Protestant man whose family was enduring such anguish. Day 14 brought the conversation that every family in the ICU dreads. Dr. Martinez asked the Harrisons to meet with her in a private conference room, away from Jake's bedside and the constant sound of medical equipment. "I need to discuss Jake's long-term prognosis with you," she began gently. "It's been 2 weeks since his accident, and while his vital signs remain stable, we're not seeing the kind of brain activity that would indicate significant recovery." The room was silent, except for the soft sound of Margaret Harrison weeping. "What are you telling us, Doctor?" Bill asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. "I'm telling you that if Jake doesn't show meaningful improvement in the next few days, we need to start having conversations about long-term care options. Patients who remain in deep coma for extended periods." She paused, searching for words that would be honest but not cruel. "The likelihood of meaningful recovery decreases significantly after 3 weeks." Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Are you saying we should give up on him?" "I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that you need to prepare yourselves for the possibility that Jake may never wake up, or if he does, he may not be the man you remember." That night, Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of going home to shower and rest as the nurses encouraged, she pulled a chair close to Jake's bed and settled in for what she somehow knew would be a crucial night. "I don't know if you can hear me, Jake," she whispered in the dim light of the ICU. "But I need you to know that I'm not giving up. I don't care what the doctors say about timelines or statistics. You're my husband, and I love you, and I'm going to be right here until you come back to me." As the hospital settled into its overnight quiet, Sarah found herself doing something she'd never done before. She began praying not just to God, but to anyone in heaven who might be listening. She thought about Maria's gentle faith, about the medal of Our Lady of Sorrows that appeared nightly on Jake's bedside table, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, prayer worked in ways her Baptist upbringing had never taught her to consider. "Mary," she whispered into the darkness, feeling foolish but desperate, "Maria says you watch over people who are suffering. If that's true, please watch over Jake. Please bring him back to us." It was 3:47 a.m. on day 18 when Jake Harrison opened his eyes. The first thing Jake Harrison became aware of was the voice. It wasn't the mechanical beeping of hospital equipment or the hushed conversations of medical staff that pulled him from the darkness. It was a woman's voice, soft and maternal, speaking his name with infinite tenderness. "Jake, Jake, my son. It's time to come home." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, wrapping around him like warm light in what had been an endless, dreamless void. For 17 days, Jake had existed in a place beyond consciousness, beyond time, beyond the awareness of his own existence. But this voice cut through that nothingness with the clarity of dawn breaking over the Cumberland Mountains. "Who's there?" Jake tried to ask, but found he had no voice, no body, no way to respond except with the pure intention of his thoughts. "Someone who loves you," the voice replied, and Jake felt a presence that was unmistakably feminine, unmistakably protective. "Someone who has been watching over you while you healed." In his unconscious state, Jake found himself in what seemed like a vast, peaceful place. Not quite a room, not quite outdoors, but somewhere safe and warm where pain didn't exist. Standing before him was a woman unlike anyone he'd ever seen, yet somehow familiar. She wore simple robes of blue and white. Her hands were folded in prayer, and her eyes held a compassion so deep it seemed to encompass all the suffering in the world. "I don't understand," Jake thought. "Who are you?" "I am the mother of all who suffer," she said gently. "I am the one who stands at the foot of every cross, who weeps with every grieving family, who holds vigil with those who love someone in darkness." "Are you?" Jake began, but found the question too large for his understanding. "I am Mary," she said simply. "And I have been praying for you, Jake Harrison. Your family's faith has moved heaven itself." "But I'm not Catholic," Jake protested, even in his unconscious state clinging to the theological distinctions that had shaped his entire life. "My family doesn't pray to saints or to you." Mary smiled, and Jake felt a love so profound it seemed to heal parts of his soul he didn't know were broken. "My son, do you think a mother's love is limited by the church her children attend? Do you think my heart is closed to Protestant prayers?" The question hung in the peaceful space like a gentle challenge to everything Jake had been taught about faith, denominational boundaries, and the narrow path to God's grace. "Your wife has been praying to me," Mary continued. "Night after night, she has asked me to watch over you. A young nurse from Mexico has placed my medal beside your bed and begged me to intercede. Your mother-in-law, who has never set foot in a Catholic church, has been lighting candles and asking me to bring you home." Jake felt tears in a place where tears shouldn't be possible. They have. Faith is not about the name above the door of the church, Jake. Faith is about love desperate enough to reach beyond tradition, beyond comfort, beyond everything familiar when someone we love is in darkness. As Mary spoke, Jake began to understand that he was being given a choice. He could remain in this peaceful place, free from pain and struggle, or he could return to a body that would require months of healing, to a life that would never be quite the same, to challenges he couldn't yet imagine. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because you have work to do," Mary said. "Because your family needs you. Because your story will help others understand that God's love is bigger than our divisions." "What kind of work?" Mary's eyes seemed to hold infinite wisdom and infinite sadness. "You'll know when the time comes. But first, you must choose. Will you come back? Will you fight through the pain and the long recovery? Will you trust that this experience has a purpose?" Jake thought about Sarah, probably still sitting beside his bed, exhausted and heartbroken but refusing to give up. He thought about his parents, his friends from church, the life he'd built in Cookville. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was his life, and suddenly he understood that it wasn't finished. "Yes," he said. "I'll come back." Mary reached out and touched his forehead, and Jake felt a warmth spread through his entire being. "Then open your eyes," Jake Harrison. Return to those who love you. And remember that you are never alone, not in suffering, not in healing, not in the work you have yet to do. At 3:47 a.m. on October 23, Jake Harrison opened his eyes in room 314 of the Cookeville Regional Medical Center ICU. The first thing he saw was Sarah's face, exhausted but beautiful, illuminated by the soft light of the monitors. She was sleeping in the chair beside his bed, her hand resting on the blanket near his arm, her head tilted at an angle that would give her a crick in her neck. Jake tried to speak but found his throat raw from the ventilator that had been breathing for him. Instead, he managed to move his fingers enough to touch Sarah's hand. Sarah woke instantly, her eyes going wide with disbelief. "Jake? Jake?" She jumped up, nearly knocking over her chair. "Oh my God, you're awake. Nurse. Nurse. He's awake." Within seconds, the room filled with medical staff. Maria Santos, who had just begun her night shift, was the first nurse to reach Jake's bedside. When she saw his eyes tracking movement and responding to voices, she crossed herself and whispered a prayer of gratitude in Spanish. "Jake, can you hear me?" asked Dr. Patterson, the neurologist on duty. "Squeeze my hand if you understand." Jake squeezed, amazed at how much effort such a simple action required. "Outstanding," Dr. Patterson said, shining a penlight into Jake's eyes to check his pupil responses. "Jake, you've been in a coma for 17 days. You're in the hospital. You had an accident at work. Do you remember anything?" Jake tried to speak but only managed to croak. Maria quickly brought him ice chips, which felt like the most wonderful thing he'd ever tasted. "Mary," he whispered finally, his voice barely audible. Sarah leaned close. "What did you say, honey?" "I heard." "Mary," Jake managed, his words slurred but understandable. "She called me back." The medical staff exchanged glances, knowing that patients emerging from comas often reported strange dreams or experiences. But Sarah felt a chill of recognition. "Jake," she whispered, "do you mean the Virgin Mary?" Jake nodded weakly, his eyes never leaving his wife's face. "She said, you prayed to her. Said she was watching." Sarah began crying, tears of joy, relief, and something else she couldn't name. She looked across the room at Maria, who was standing quietly in the corner, and saw the nurse's eyes filled with tears as well. Over the next several hours, as word spread that Jake was awake, room 314 became a celebration space. Bill and Margaret Harrison arrived within 30 minutes, having maintained a vigil at the hospital that rivaled Sarah's. Pastor Jim came as soon as Sarah called him, along with several church members who had been praying around the clock. But it was the conversation later that morning, when Jake had regained more strength and could speak more clearly, that would change the Harrison family forever. "Jake," Sarah said when they finally had some privacy, "tell me about what you experienced. What do you remember?" Jake looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw not just exhaustion but a depth of faith and love that he'd never fully appreciated before. "I was somewhere peaceful," he began slowly. "Not dark, not scary like you might think. Just quiet. And then I heard this voice calling my name." "What kind of voice?" "A woman. The most loving voice I've ever heard. She said she was Mary, and that she'd been watching over me while I healed." Sarah took his hand. "Jake, I have to tell you something. I did pray to her. I know it goes against everything we were taught, but I was so desperate, and Maria, your nurse, she told me that Mary watches over people who suffer. So I asked her to bring you back." Jake squeezed his wife's hand. "She told me you did. She said faith isn't about which church you attend, but about love that reaches beyond tradition when someone you love is in darkness. What else did she say? That I have work to do. That this happened for a reason, and that my story would help others understand that God's love is bigger than our divisions. Over the next several weeks, as Jake slowly recovered his strength and motor functions, the story of his experience began to spread throughout Cookeville. Some dismissed it as the hallucinations of an injured brain. Others saw it as a miraculous intervention that transcended denominational boundaries. Dr. Martinez, who had prepared Jake's family for the worst possible outcomes, could only describe his recovery as extraordinary. From a medical standpoint, she told the local newspaper, Jake's recovery exceeds every expectation we had. Patients with his type of brain injury typically face months or years of rehabilitation, if they recover at all. Jake is walking, talking, and thinking clearly after just 6 weeks. I can't explain it scientifically. But it was the changes in Jake himself that most amazed those who knew him well. The man who returned from his coma was recognizably Jake Harrison, same humor, same work ethic, same love for his family, but with a spiritual depth and openness that surprised everyone. It's like he's been given a second chance and he knows it, Sarah told their pastor during one of Jake's rehabilitation sessions. He talks about faith differently now. He's still Baptist, still loves our church, but he's broader somehow. More inclusive. This new perspective was tested when Jake returned to First Baptist Church for the first time 3 months after his accident. He walked slowly, still using a cane and tiring easily, but his presence in the sanctuary was electric. The congregation had been praying for him daily, and his recovery was seen as a direct answer to their prayers. But it was during the testimony time that Jake shared something that would challenge his church family in unexpected ways. I want to thank everyone for your prayers, Jake said, standing carefully at his pew. I truly believe that prayer saved my life. But I also want to tell you about something that might surprise some of you. He paused, looking around at faces he'd known his entire life. People who had baptized him, married him, supported him through every crisis until this one. While I was in the coma, I believe I encountered the Virgin Mary. Now, I know that makes some of you uncomfortable, and I understand why. But I want you to know that she didn't try to make me Catholic or change my beliefs. She just loved me back to life. The sanctuary was completely silent. What I learned is that God's love is bigger than our church buildings, bigger than our denominational differences, bigger than the boundaries we draw between us and them. The same God we worship is the God that Catholics worship, and Mary is honored not because she competes with Jesus, but because she points to him. Pastor Jim, who had known Jake since he was a teenager, found himself in the difficult position of responding to a testimony that was both deeply moving and theologically challenging for his congregation. Jake, he said carefully, we're all grateful for your recovery and for what you've shared. I think what we can all agree on is that God worked a miracle in your life, and we praise him for that. After the service, reactions were mixed. Some congregation members embraced Jake's testimony as evidence of God's unlimited grace. Others worried that his brain injury had left him confused about proper Christian doctrine. But it was Jake's response to both acceptance and criticism that most impressed those watching his recovery. I'm not trying to change anyone's beliefs, he told those who questioned his experience. I'm just sharing what happened to me. If it helps someone else open their heart a little wider to God's love, then maybe that was part of the purpose. 6 months after his accident, Jake returned to work, not operating tower cranes, but in a supervisory role that accommodated his ongoing recovery needs. His employer, amazed by his determination and positive attitude, created a safety training position that utilized Jake's experience to help prevent future accidents. It was in this new role that Jake began to understand what Mary had meant about having work to do. "I've started talking to guys about more than just safety equipment and procedures," Jake told Sarah one evening. "I talked to them about taking care of each other, about how precious life is, about not taking family for granted. Some of these guys are carrying heavy burdens, addiction, divorce, financial problems, and somehow my story gives them hope." 1 year after his accident, Jake received a letter that he kept on his dresser for the rest of his life. It was from Maria Santos, the Catholic nurse who had cared for him in the ICU. "Dear Jake, I wanted you to know that your story has touched many hearts at the hospital. Several Protestant families who have loved ones in critical condition have asked me to pray to Our Lady for intercession, and some have even asked me to place blessed medals in their family members' rooms. More importantly, some of my Catholic friends who had negative feelings about Protestants have been moved by your family's openness to Mary's intercession. You've helped heal divisions that have existed for generations. I believe Our Lady chose you not despite your Protestant faith, but because of it. She knew your story would build bridges that no amount of theological debate could construct. Your sister in Christ, Maria Santos. P.S. I still pray for you every night, and I know Our Lady continues to watch over you and your family." Today, Jake Harrison continues to live in Cookeville, working in construction safety and serving as a deacon in his Baptist church. He speaks regularly at interfaith gatherings about his experience, always emphasizing that he remains Protestant while honoring the role that Mary played in his recovery. His testimony has become something of a legend in Middle Tennessee, inspiring both Protestant and Catholic families facing medical crises to pray with broader hearts and deeper hope. "I learned that when someone you love is dying," Jake often says when sharing his story, "you don't care whether the prayer comes from a Baptist, a Catholic, or anyone else who believes in God's power to heal. You just want them to come back to you." And every year on October 23rd, the anniversary of his awakening, Jake and Sarah visit the ICU at Cookeville Regional Medical Center, bringing flowers and gratitude to the medical staff who cared for him, and spending a few quiet moments in room 314, thanking God for second chances and for love that transcends every boundary human beings try to create. Because some miracles aren't just about healing bodies, they're about healing the divisions that separate hearts that should be united in faith, hope, and love. And there you have it. This incredible story of divine intervention and miraculous healing touched your heart, didn't it? Jake proved that when someone we love is dying, the Virgin Mary's maternal love transcends every denominational boundary to bring them back to life, right? If you were moved by this real testimony of how a Protestant construction worker was in a coma for 17 days and woke up after hearing the Virgin Mary whisper his name, calling him back to his family, hit that like button below. It really helps me continue sharing these stories that show Mary's love reaches every Christian heart, regardless of denomination. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and hit that notification bell. Every week there's a new testimony that will renew your faith that the Virgin Mary intercedes for all believers, Protestant and Catholic alike, when they need her most. And don't forget to check out our store in the first pinned comment. We have amazing Christian products, including the 365-day devotional, perfect for strengthening your relationship with Jesus and understanding Mary's universal maternal love. Tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced divine intervention during a medical crisis? Do you believe the Virgin Mary can reach across denominational lines to heal? And if you also believe in Mary's love that transcends church boundaries, right? Mary loves all Christians. Declare your faith in her universal intercession. Share this video with families facing medical emergencies, with people struggling between denominational differences, with anyone who needs to know that in times of crisis, God's love is bigger than our church labels. Thanks for watching until the end. May the Virgin Mary bless your family with health and healing, and may her love unite all Christians in times of need. See you in the next testimony.